of 1334 by 750 and a pixels per inch count of 326 ppi. Now for a processor, it features Apple's A8 chip, which is also a 64-bit processor. It's a dual-core processor and it clocks in at 1.4 gigahertz. Now it also features 1 gigabyte of RAM, and for the camera here, it rocks an 8-megapixel shooter with a 1/3 inch sensor. Now in terms of battery life here, you're going to get around a full day's worth of use, so definitely an upgrade from the iPhone 5S to the iPhone 6, which means you're going to get 14 hours of talk time and 10 hours of LTE. This is just what Apple's claiming, but you will be able to get a full day's worth of use, even if you use your phone pretty heavily. So there's no micro SD card slot on here like you would find on the Samsung Galaxy S5, but there is a fingerprint reader known as Touch ID, which works extremely well, and there is NFC to use with Apple Pay and other applications like that. Moving over to the iPhone 6 Plus here, it boasts a 5.5-inch display with a resolution of 1920 by 1080 and 401 pixels per inch. It rocks Apple's A8 chip, which is also a 64-bit processor, and it's an also dual-core processor clocking in at 1.4 gigahertz. It's rocking an 8-megapixel camera along with a 1/3 inch sensor with optical image stabilization, so that's different than the iPhone 6. For battery life, you're going to get around a day and a half's worth of use, which is perfect for me because my iPhone 5S dies way too quickly. And just coming from Apple's website here, you're going to be able to get around 24 hours of talk time or 12 hours of LTE data. But obviously, you're not using LTE every hour of the day. Just browse everything. Yes, it is on, but you're obviously going to be using it in moderation. But even if you do use your phone hard at certain points, you're going to see a day and a half's worth of battery life. And finally, there's a fingerprint scanner on here and NFC, which will work perfectly for Apple's Pay, but there's no micro SD card slot like you find on the Galaxy S5. And finally, coming to the Galaxy S5, it features a 5.1-inch screen with a 1080p resolution and a 432 pixels per inch count. It features the Snapdragon 801 processor, which is also quad-core and clocks in at 2.5 gigahertz. For GPU, it comes with the Adreno 330, 2 gigabytes of RAM, a 16-megapixel camera with Ultra HD, also known as 4K video, but it is unstabilized, and it boasts a 2800 milliamp hour battery, which in my testing, I was able to get around a day to a little bit over a day's worth of battery life, and I use my phones pretty heavily. So there is a micro SD card slot, meaning you're not going to have to shell out hundreds of extra dollars just to get expandable storage, and that's kind of why I love micro SD. So it supports up to 128 gigabytes just in terms of expandable storage. It's IP67 certified, which means you can take this thing through water, etc. And we actually did an ultimate water test. If you want to check it out, the link can be found right below that like button. And it also features a fingerprint scanner for added security. Now for the software experience here, the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus both boast iOS 8. So iOS 8 is a simple flat user interface. It's very easy to pick up, and I even gave this phone to my grandma. She was able to kind of master it within an hour or so. I mean, yes, she's not a techie, but iOS is so simple, flat, and it's very easy to understand. So that's just that in its own sense. Now, some of the design cons here is there's very little options for customization, and the operating system is very stale and outdated. Hopefully iOS 9 or the next generation of iOS is different. But in terms of features here, you're going to get the fingerprint unlock, also known as Touch ID, and Apple Pay, which works on the NFC chip found in the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. But for software on the Galaxy S5 at the time of this recording, it is Android 4.4.4 KitKat. It has TouchWiz on there, which is Samsung's own skin, and I'm not a big fan of TouchWiz, mainly being because it is very blocky. I just think it looks ugly. If you go into the settings menu, you're going to find like 60 something options just to do things. I mean, the operating system is nicer from last year's iteration of TouchWiz, but it's still pretty ugly in my opinion. And there's lots of bloatware on here, but that's totally understandable. Up next here, it is the displays. Starting with the iPhone 6, it features a 4.7-inch display, which clocks in at 1134 by 750. In terms of resolution, yielding a 326 pixels per inch count, and it looks fantastic. Now for the iPhone 6 Plus here, it clocks in at 5.5 inches with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. Also looks awesome and probably is my favorite display out of all of these phones. And for the Galaxy S5, it's a 5.1-inch display with a 1080p resolution. So both the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus are IPS LCD displays, as Samsung's Galaxy S5 is a Super AMOLED. And you can definitely tell on the S5 that colors look a little bit oversaturated. I love saturation, so I don't really care. But with the iPhone 6, the colors look fantastic. It's nice and bright, vibrant, and I would honestly say this will work for a lot of people. Now, if you want to bump it up a little bit and spend a little bit more money, the iPhone 6 Plus looks great. It's a huge, vibrant display. It's 5.5 inches, and with 401 pixels per inch, you're definitely in for a treat. And then for the Samsung Galaxy S5, it looks great. Their displays, I'm definitely impressed with. It can look a little bit oversaturated, so if you don't really mind that, then this display definitely does work. And moving to the camera side of things here, and starting with the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus, both have an 8 megapixel shooter, and with the iPhone 6, I thought the camera looked fantastic. It has a larger 1/3 inch sensor than before, with larger pixels known as focus pixels. Focus pixels are both found on the 6 and the 6 Plus. You have 240 frames per second slow motion along with 60 frames per second at 1080p, and I was just blown away by the iPhone 6's camera. Now hopping over to the iPhone 6 Plus, it has an amazing camera, a large 1/3 inch sensor with optical image stabilization. So optical image stabilization is not featured on the iPhone 6, so that is a perk in itself, but on the iPhone 6 Plus, it does include 240 frames per second slow motion and 60 frames per second at 1080p. It looks great. I personally loved the iPhone 6 Plus's camera a tad bit more than the iPhone 6 in that respect. And then hopping over to the Samsung